Hello and welcome back to the Pave the Way podcast, an initiative by the Hagidi Foundation, where I, your host Akash Basu, speak with mobility experts and people with interesting ideas on all kinds of topics relating to sustainable mobility and transport planning. On today's episode, we are joined by Mario J. Alves, the Secretary General of the International Federation of Pedestrians. Mario holds a degree in civil engineering from Lisbon Technical University and a Master of Science in Transport from the Imperial College of Science, Technology and Medicine. Over the years, Mario has played a pivotal role in various international projects, including coordinating mobility plans and contributing to the promotion of active modes of transport. Today, we will delve into the crucial topic of walking and pedestrian-friendly infrastructure and its significance in urban planning. We'll explore Mario's insights on the importance of walking, international best practices, and his recommendations for promoting more pedestrian-friendly practices. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest for today. Happy to have you on, Mario.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure.
Let's begin with what is the International Federation of Pedestrians?
Well, the International Federation of Pedestrians, it's a bit of a coincidence because it was founded in 1963, which happens to be my birth year.
Really?
So it's exactly the same age as me, 60 years old. He had a very active moments in the 60s, in the 70s. Then the story is it was not kept very well, but we have certain periods that was less active. But since 10 years ago, we have become quite active with the social networks. We are on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and all that. So that made us a little bit more well-known across the world, and we start growing. I think we grew more or less to the double of the NGOs. Basically, it's an umbrella organization of NGOs that work in advocacy for pedestrians in their own country. And nowadays, we are around 40 NGOs in around, 50 NGOs in around 40 countries, because certain countries have more than one NGO, so there is more NGOs than countries. And the situation is a little bit like this, simplifying. And in Europe, the walking activist NGOs are older. Sometimes they are from the 70s and the 80s, so they are like 30 years old, 40 years old. Actually, the Living Streets, which is a very well-known NGO in the UK, United Kingdom, is quite old. And in Europe, they work more in promoting walking. So, and they are NGOs they have quite a bit of staff. They are sometimes well funded. It's always very difficult to get funding for walking, but when you work with health, in the last decade, health became quite a big concern in Europe and Australia. So there is quite a bit of money for walking. Related to promoting walking for schools, promoting elderly people to walk more, for diabetes, depression. Walking has an incredible variety of health benefits. And actually someone said that if walking was a pill, was invented, next day will be a Nobel Prize, because it would be such a miraculous cure for everything that it's something that if it was a pill would get a Nobel Prize straight away. But anyway, I was saying that, so we have the Europe and Australia with those organizations, and we have organizations now quite strong in Latin America and Mexico. We have a very large network of pedestrian organizations in Liga Peatonal, which is an organization that networks organizations in Mexico. We have 3 or 4 in Latin America, in Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, and that's in Africa. We will have the first NGO for pedestrians now in the next few weeks. That's the way it goes. And our work is basically to webinars and policy papers. We try to make networking. If someone goes to visit another country, we'll give address, we'll give contacts, and we'll do that kind of work. Nowadays, we are working in international projects. We did projects for North Korea, and we are doing some European projects, 3-year projects, 4-year projects on walking. Right now, we are doing one that is about how to increase the usage of public transport. And interestingly enough, the operators of public transport only start thinking about their clients at the train station or the bus stop. It's like they think that the pedestrians fly to the, to the bus stop or to the train station. Of course, people need to get there from their home or from their work to their train station. And then if the walking conditions are not good, what we call the walkability, then they lose clients, of course, and then people start thinking about other options like buying a car or a motorcycle and all that. So that's very, very important to think when we think about public transport, that we think about the catchment area around the train station or the bus station. And that's it. We are also working in projects that will think about reallocating space, because for the major part of the 20th century, most of the space was given to cars. So there's a lot of places in Europe, even without sidewalks or with bad sidewalks or with barriers in the sidewalks or in bad conditions. So we will work that out.
Yeah. With working with so many NGOs in so many countries, you must have a very good idea of what the challenges are with promoting walkability and pedestrian-friendly infrastructure, as well as what we can do, what governments can do, what people can do to actually promote it themselves. Let's start with the challenges. What are some of the main challenges that countries have when promoting walkability?
The challenges vary a lot. Just to give you an idea, our Canadian NGOs are very worried about snow. So that because the snow is cleared and they clear the snow and they put the snow on the sidewalks. So that's very unfair. So they clear the snow for the cars, and then the sidewalks are full of snow, which is unacceptable, unfair. But that's the tradition of the 20th century, where the cars had a priority. But for example, in India, in Kerala, we have an NGO that is very worried about wild dogs, for example. That wild dogs can be a problem. If you have even disease like rabies and all that, that can be scary. There is a lot of NGOs like in South America that are fighting for children to get to school. So it's children that have to walk to school, many of them. So they will need to have safe and comfortable ways to walk to school. So the challenges in general, they are common, but they vary quite a bit. In general is barriers to walking or lack of sidewalks. When you have sidewalks, it is the speed and the danger of the car. So if I had to elect one thing that is quite common in all the NGOs, is the fact that cars are too fast and too dangerous. So one thing that you could start to do, even here in India, is to reduce speeds. And to reduce speeds, you need to work the environment and the streets with traffic calming. Traffic calming is a set of measures. That could be like speed tables on zebra crossings, could be narrowing the lanes, could be making the intersections a little bit more tight. You can even plant trees. That, for example, the canopy of the trees make the speeds less intense. So there is a lot of work to do in reducing speeds. Actually, Europe nowadays, there is like a trend of making the speeds inside the cities 30 kilometers per hour. It is something that is going on, and more cities are going for it. I just read the news this morning that the Netherlands, Amsterdam, 70 or 80% of the streets will become 30 kilometers per hour in the end of this month.
Wow.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Well, we have heard of, in India we hear of the best practices out there, Netherlands, maybe Denmark, even London. But here we have a lot of issues with our walkability. Of course, speeding is an issue. we have a lack of space given for them. Actually, one of your quotes is one of my favorites, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't know the exact quote, but you can tell the functioning of a healthy democracy by the quality and size of its sidewalks.
Yes, actually it's inspired in somewhat by Gandhi, because he said something that
Really?
the quality of a democracy or a community can be measured by the way they treat the most vulnerable. So in a way it's inspired by that, but yes, that's one of my quotes. I remember that I was quite quoted on Twitter.
Yeah,
because of
really
that.
were.
Yes.
We've also done a few posts with that, and it is one of my favorite quotes. But here we don't, there will be some streets where you see that there is adequate space, but often you'll see people walking on the street with the cars. Often you'll see our sidewalks with trees right in the middle, or signs right in the middle, or vendors, and people can't walk on them. Have you ever encountered these kinds of issues with any of your other projects, and how do you really go about, changing the mindset entirely and making sure that people walking, the most vulnerable users, are safe?
Yeah. Well, I'm in India for a week now, so the environment is very different from where I come from. So I'm very much more keen to listen and to observe, because we are not here to give advice or lessons to an environment that we don't know or understand. There is issues of governance, there is a lot of issues that we need really to understand. So one of the things that I've been struggling in the past few days is how I would start. Indeed, that's more or less the question. And for example, the fact that the lanes are not marked. So many streets, they don't have any marked lanes. And marked lanes, it really depends, because sometimes, for example, in rural roads in Europe, in Netherlands, they are taking away the markings because the markings reduce speed. If you take away the markings, they reduce speed because the roads are so narrow that people don't have a way to orientate themselves, so they reduce the speed. But in urban areas, I think it does help for pedestrians if there is lanes, so they know how to negotiate the crossing, for example. That would be a basic thing, especially because in between the lanes, it can be really this gap that pedestrians can have a little bit of a safe, narrow strip. If you are crossing a street where the cars are all over without any kind of lanes, it becomes very, very confusing and scary for pedestrians, and they can be really caught in a very bad way. So that would be quite simple, cheap, create, and put the lanes. And I've seen in the roads that have lanes, the people keep to the lanes. So that's not something that, it's cultural, people don't keep to the lanes. In general, people keep to the lanes. They're very good drivers. I'm impressed how, people here, they are, it's amazing. In fact, they are always millimeters to each other. But I never saw, and I've been all around, I never saw anyone touching anyone. Someone told me that they saw their taxi touched another one, but that's interesting as well, because in Europe, if you touch a car, you spend like half an hour discussing. Here, they didn't care, they just carried on, which was an interesting cultural fact. But anyway, the other thing would be, after having the lanes defined, maybe the speed tables on zebra crossings are very effective ways to reduce speeds, and especially on the approach of the zebra crossing. So I would do like large tables with a zebra crossing in the middle, so that the speed of approach of the zebra crossing would be slow. So and we know by research that people tend to stop more if the speed is low. If cars are fast, they tend not to stop in the zebra crossing. If they go slowly, if they start going up the ramp and there is pedestrians crossing, they will stop. Okay? Even if not everyone will stop, because that depends. For example, in Europe, there are countries that stop more than others in zebra crossings. Unfortunately, the situation for pedestrians all over the world have problems. So don't think that other countries are paradise for pedestrians. They are not. Even the Netherlands, they invested a lot on cycling. They cut sidewalks in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 80s to make way for cycle passes, which is not the ideal way. You should always take space from cars. So even the Netherlands have issues. For example, Amsterdam has a lot of tourism. There is a lot of terraces with chairs over the messy sidewalk, with posters, chairs. It's not easy to be a pedestrian, for example, in Amsterdam. It's very good to be a cyclist, but not a pedestrian. So all the countries they have their own challenges. I would say that India would have starting, for example, to enforce not only the speeds, but for example, enforce the stopping in the zebra crossings. I think that could be something that could be coming from the governors or the state, to give instructions to protect the vulnerable, and just to take seriously this quote that I was speaking about, Gandhi, that you can see the level of sophistication and democracy of a society when it really takes good care of the most vulnerable. If it is a society that the stronger, the mightier, has more power, then we have a problem with democracy. And I think this is not a problem only from India, it's all over the world. And this is a problem of democracy, in fact.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to make. I think one thing you had said is that the cars here drive very close to each other and they're always swerving and overtaking. And we are told that if you learn to drive in India, you can drive anywhere in the world.
That's true.
Because it is,
But I feel also that, and this is also very common, is that there is also a class issue. So there is a lot of aggression and violence in the traffic. So even the honking, it's like, I'm here, this is my space, and they just push away walkers. And walkers all over the world, in general, they are the most poor and the ones that cannot afford the car. So there is issues here, political issues, that a democracy that doesn't really take care of the most poor, the most vulnerable. And you have this idea that someone that has a big car, an expensive car, can push you away. And I think the state, the government, society should not encourage this kind of behaviors. So even the honking, for example, like the noise pollution, can be very, very stressing. And there is a lot of studies recently that noise can create really things like even heart problems, things that people never thought that noise could be a problem. And here the streets are very, very noisy, and everybody knows that. And it is something that I have a colleague that tried to ask one of the taxi drivers here in India to stop honking. He got a bit nervous in the beginning, but finally he noticed something very interesting, that he was driving much more careful. Because when you're honking, you have this, okay, I'm honking, he knows I'm here, so I can go on and on and on, right? If you don't honk, suddenly it's like you're being muted. Suddenly you have to be very careful. And all the aggression and the aggressivity of driving pipes down, and then things might be interesting. So it could be a very interesting project to see how the honking also injects this kind of violence on the street.
I'd love to hear about maybe a few or one of your a successful project that has been done by the International Federation of Pedestrians, where maybe the initial situation was also complicated and maybe where pedestrians weren't being prioritized, and what was maybe done to transform it to whatever extent it was?
Well, we work more on policy, projects of long term. Contrary with the World Resource Institute, for example, that does a lot of good work on the terrain, like creating new public spaces or changing intersections. Wonderful work. I was yesterday in their office talking with them. They are doing a lot of good work in Brazil, in Mumbai. They have a lot of here, even in Delhi. So in the case of the International Federation of Pedestrians, we are more working on policy. And So it's very hard to tell you like a project that we did. We did a report for South Korea that got an award, but it's a report about policy,
Right.
like how a government or cities can change policy towards walking. And we have this project, for example, in Europe that was called MORE, to see streets as ecosystems, and created a series of tools. So you have a street, and then a tool can more or less reallocate space from what used to be for the new street. Usually more wider sidewalks, less speeds, narrow lanes, and all that. So for us, it's not something that we can immediately measure success by the change, like WRI can do. We are like in a very much long-term policy making and in influencing, for example, the governments or the parliaments. For example, we write letters to governments. In New Zealand, they wanted to authorize e-scooters and bicycles on the sidewalk, and we wrote a letter, and happily they stopped this law that was going to come. In Poland, we wrote a letter to Poland because in Poland the road code said that pedestrians only had priority after they started crossing, which was not really a very good policy, and they changed now, and pedestrians, when they are approaching the zebra crossing, they have priority straight away when they are still on the sidewalk.
Oh, that's great.
So we have our successes, but it's not really like we don't work with public space directly, like many organizations do a great job for that. We are in another kind of situation.
Right, okay. We talk a lot about, so I think most of what we've discussed when it comes to how we can address the problem relates to design changes on the road or policy changes. And, a lot of people think that the issue lies with behavior. The drivers, it's a behavioral issue, they drive fast, they don't. Pedestrians, it's a behavioral issue because a lot of the time pedestrians are blamed because they are crossing the road where there isn't a crossing, where maybe there is a crossing not so far away. So I just wanted to ask you, do you think that to any extent it is a behavior issue, or is it that if you design the system properly, that behavior adjusts accordingly?
Well, according to the safe system approach, we should put as a first priority the infrastructure. So basically, people tend to react to the infrastructure. If the infrastructure is good and well designed, people tend to behave much better. On the other hand, of course, car drivers need some form of education and they need a license. So that's the big difference. So the car driver has a license so that the government, the community gives them a permission to drive. If they don't behave well, if they drink or if they start seeing worse when they are older, society takes away the license, so they have to walk or they have to take the public transport. Contrary, walkers or pedestrians, they don't need a driving license, and that's the way to do it. That's correct. So it's a universal condition. So it could be a 3-year-old, can be someone with Alzheimer, can be someone that cannot see, a blind person. So it's very difficult to generalize and to make campaigns for pedestrians. When the government says, let's teach the pedestrians or let's make a campaign for pedestrians, first is victim blaming, which we should not do. And second, pedestrians are not generalized because the way you communicate to a child or the way you communicate to an elderly, it's totally different. You cannot say, for example, some governments say, they give advice saying that pedestrians, when they cross the street, they have to cross the eyes with a driver. Yeah, that's an advice that if you give to a friend, that's okay. But for a government to give that advice, many pedestrians cannot see that far. Children probably cannot really have that intuition to do that. So to have that kind of campaigns do not work. If you are teaching children how to adapt to an unjust infrastructure is ethically wrong, because if your responsibility is to put the infrastructure safe why should you start teaching children how to adapt to a situation that you could not make it safe? Yes, so that's ethically wrong. So the focus should be on the infrastructure. Reducing speeds, making the table speeds on zebra crossing, narrowing the lanes, putting trees, for example, because with climate change there will be much more phenomena of heat, more rain. So there will be a lot of things to do to encourage people to walk and make people walk safer. The other problem we have is that pedestrians, they don't have a political identity. So car drivers do have a political identity. So if you start narrowing the lane, or if there is a pothole in the street, there will be a lot of people complaining. Yes, but pedestrians, they don't even think about that. They don't feel that they are pedestrians because it's such a natural way, and everybody's a pedestrian. So sometimes I tell this joke that two fish are talking to each other in the water, of course, and then a bird passes by and asks, "How is the water?" And the fish look at each other and say, "What is water?" Okay? So for pedestrians, they don't even understand sometimes that they are a form of transport and that they have rights that they should fight for. That's why, for example, that in most part of the world, cycling NGOs are very strong. They have a very strong lobby. They have a lot of noise. They make a lot of noise, rightly so. I am a cyclist as well. I know all these. But pedestrians, they don't tend to be so demanding or organizing themselves in NGOs and all that. So that's also a problem that we have to fix, is to empower the pedestrians, empower the children that walk because they don't have driving license, and to delay, for example, that is happening around the world, is delaying people getting driving license and buying cars.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that you made, and even thinking myself, when I'm a pedestrian or when I see a pedestrian, you forget that this is also a mode of transport and that you can also fight for your rights.
Exactly.
You're absolutely right, and it's you don't feel politically inclined, but the car users, the powerful are able to get changes made for themselves, whereas the vulnerable users don't even realize that they maybe have a voice in this conversation at all. So yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point. The final question we ask on this podcast is always, how do we pave the way forward? Now, I think we've discussed that a bit. So I guess I'll ask you a slightly two-part question. Number one, you did give some ideas for Indian cities. Now, I know you haven't been here long, but do you have, when we think of paving the way forward for a positive walking future for India, do you see any major solutions, either behavioral or design or infrastructural? And also, generally, do you see a positive future for pedestrians around the world?
One thing that you notice straight away is that in India walks a lot. India walks a lot.
Yeah.
There is a lot of people walking. And there is even a power struggle in the streets. We can see sometimes very long avenues with barriers in the middle, because to keep away pedestrians from crossing to one side to the other. And that's in a way quite aggressive and violent, because you are in the street, you see a friend on the other side, how do you get there? You just, sometimes what they do is they do the pedestrian bridges, right? Pedestrian bridges look a good idea first, but they are not very good idea, because elderly cannot really go up and down. Pedestrians, they don't, it's a lot of, it's tiring, they have to walk a lot to do that. So basically what happens in many places is, or they jump the barrier, or they just find a gap somewhere and they just start doing it. So start fighting pedestrians like it's a problem. And the policies of cities in India should be that pedestrians are part of the solution, are a big part of the solution, because if people start walking more, it will be less polluted. I know India struggles with a lot of pollution. Air quality is a big problem. And when we walk, we are not doing any kind of emissions. Yeah. So that's something that people should start to understand, that do not treat pedestrians as a problem, And I can feel that traffic engineers in cities here still feel that pedestrians are to keep away from the streets. So pave the way to the future with zebra crossings, at least, on speed tables that should be large enough so that the cars slow down before the zebra crossing, and starting to enforce, but enforce the laws that protect the most vulnerable. Do not enforce pedestrians to behave, because pedestrians have their own reasons. They are good for society. The more pedestrians there is, the better. They are the most poor, mostly, and the most vulnerable. So you should not start punishing pedestrians. And this is a very important message. This is not about victim blaming. We should not start to do that. And the same way that a city should not make a brochure saying, do not go to this neighborhood because it's dangerous. No, what the city should do is to make that neighborhood safe, right? So to start doing brochures to say that pedestrians should do that and should do that, it's wrong. We should make the environment safe for them. And I think this is a very strong message, because we feel all over the world that government agencies are sometimes very keen in teaching children or pedestrians how to walk or how to behave, when they should tackle the danger at the source.
Yeah.
And we know where the source of danger is. Yeah, it's a box of metal with 1 ton. Yeah, and that goes at very fast speeds. In fact, it can be a lethal machine.
Yeah.
So you need responsibility, you need a permit. So those are the people that need to be taught how to behave. But most importantly will be the infrastructure that should lead them, the car driver. The infrastructure should lead the car driver to behave. So proper lane painting, larger sidewalks, trees, shadow is going to be very important. It's already very important. I know here, now we are in the winter, but I know in the summer you need shadow. Points of water is very important. Toilets for the elderly is very important. So there is a lot to do with pedestrians. And usually, if you do a viaduct or a tunnel, you can do thousands of kilometers of sidewalks for the price of 1 tunnel. Yes.
Yeah.
Or yes. So that's something that I really would like to people to think about. That pedestrians are good for the city, are not the problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's again really well said, because as you said, like, enforce proper behavior on the car users, because they drive the lethal machine. I mean, India has the highest death rate on the roads, and it's fundamentally wrong to blame the pedestrians. It's fundamentally wrong to tell them to enforce their behavior, because, like you said, fish swim, birds fly, humans walk. It's natural, you know.
Exactly. And go back to the Gandhi writings, because you really made this very, very clear. Take care of the most vulnerable, and then everybody will be much better.
Thank you so much. I think this has been a really insightful conversation. I hope our listeners enjoy as well. And I hope we have another chance to talk sometime in the future.
Yes, it will
And
be
take
my
care.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.